For our regular attendees, the donation box is mounted to the back wall. Donations can also be made on the church website. No youth group tonight, but we will have board meeting tonight at 6 o'clock. Should be a rip-roaring fun time. Prayer meeting will continue Wednesday at 10:30, and then Bible study Wednesday at 6. And should be fun. Wrapping up Judges, finally. And then we get ready for Ruth, which is a much better book. Belgrade School Needs, we're still collecting the deodorant and high-protein snacks. If you've got any questions, you can see Pam, but the box is back in between the two chairs in the back, and we appreciate all the donations coming in for that. It really does make a difference for these students as you think about how hard it is to study and concentrate on an empty stomach, and to be able to provide these is a great benefit. Our Easter egg hunt is coming, and it's getting closer and closer, and maybe the snow will be gone. It's supposed to be nice the next week or so. You can always hope. April 8th at 10:30, our Easter egg hunt will be over at the school, and we're excited about that. We are still collecting pre-wrapped candy. I think we're going to have about 2,500 eggs, so that's a lot of eggs. That's a lot of candy. Some of those we've ordered some little knickknacks for, bouncy balls, and Brittany's ordered some stuff. I don't remember it all. She told me, but I don't remember it all. But we do need a lot of candy, so if you want to keep bringing candy. And you can stuff at home if you'd like to help us with that. There's some empty eggs back there, and then there's a place to drop off if you want to stuff at home, or you can come and have fun with us and have an egg stuffing party. So not this Sunday, but next Sunday, or not this coming Sunday, the Sunday after that, the 26th, we're going to have a special egg stuffing party. It's going to be an excellent time, as I understand it, and plenty of egg puns. Ron got that one. Yes, it'll be a lot of fun. So you won't want to miss that if you're available to help us. It'll be immediately after the church. There is a sign-up sheet if you'd like to bring a dish to help feed us as we work. That would be great. And bonus points for egg-themed dishes. That's not up there. That's just my thought. We do have a couple of birthdays this week. So Isn't who's not here this morning, but Miss Rosalie, it's her birthday today. It's her first birthday. First one she's ever had. Yeah, we're excited. And it kind of overlaps with Dad's, because that's not very fair, is it, Ryan? 2 days away, your birthday no longer counts. I get it. But they both have birthdays this week, and so we want to sing happy birthday to them. All right. All right, we're excited for those birthdays. All right, I'm going to have a word of prayer, and then we'll have a little switch up here. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your love for us, and thank you for the privilege of being able to gather here together today. God, I know that this is a hard morning with daylight savings. It's a morning that makes us all grumpy. None of us like to lose an hour, and even though we gain an hour in the fall, we forget that and we get grumpy. At least I do. But I thank you that even on this morning that you are here with us, that you are here to worship with us and to guide our time together. And God, I pray that you would go before us in everything that is said and done. Would it be to your glory? And would you speak to us the message that you know each one of us needs to hear? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Well, next Sunday, I'm actually going to be gone. There's a youth event for youth in Montana, Wyoming. They call it Rejoice. And it's going to be a special time in Sheridan, Wyoming. And we're taking 3 teens this year. We're taking Olivia and Ava. They're going to do a song. And then Ava and Carissa have done a video, or they're finishing a video. And you'll get to see that video on Easter Sunday. That's kind of a special treat that's coming. But for the song, Olivia and Ava are supposed to sing that for you before they go. And so this morning they're going to come up and sing their song. Come on up. And so they're going to sing their special, and then next Sunday, while we're at Rejoice, you guys have the awesome opportunity to hear Austin Schwartz share his testimony. And Austin is here with us this morning. He's a part of our Missoula church, although he grew up in Livingston and is back in Livingston right now doing some work, but he's attending the Missoula church. But we're so excited that he's going to be able to share his testimony and just share how God worked in his story. The only bummer is that I'm not going to be here to hear it. I'm going to have to watch the video. Yeah, it'll be recorded. So looking forward to that for you next week, and sorry that I won't be here to hear it, but I'll be with these guys and with Carissa as they do their thing in Sheridan, Wyoming. So, all right, I'll let you girls sing.
Out of the shadows, bound for the gallows, a dead man walking, till love came calling. Rise up, rise up, rise up,
rise up, 6 feet under. Thought it was over. Answer to a prayer. Voice of the Savior. Rise up,
rise up,
rise up,
rise up. And all at once I came alive.
this beating heart, these opened eyes.
The grave let go, the darkness should have known. You still rolling stones, you're still rolling, rolling. You still rolling stones, you're still rolling, rolling. You still rolling stones. Now that you saved me, I sing 'cause you gave me a song of revival. I put it on vinyl. Rise up,
Rise up,
rise up.
rise up. Once was
Doom,
blinded.
doom, doom,
Now I
doom,
see
doom,
it.
doom,
Heard about the power, and now I believe it. Rise up,
rise up,
rise up.
rise up. And all at once I came alive.
This beating heart, these opened eyes.
The grave let go, the darkness should have known. You still rolling stones, you're still rolling, rolling. You're still rolling stones, you're still rolling, rolling. You're still rolling stones. Oh, I thought that I was too far gone for everything that I've done wrong. Yeah, I'm the one who dug this grave, but you called my name, you called my name. Ooh,
I thought that I was too far gone
oh,
for everything that I done wrong.
oh,
I'm the one who dug this grave, but you
called my name, you called my name, and all at once I came alive.
This beating heart, these opened eyes.
The grave let go, the darkness should have known. You still rolling stones, you're still rolling, rolling. You're still rolling stones, you're still rolling, rolling. You're still rolling stones.
All right, let's make a mess here. Well, thank you, ladies, and looking forward to Austin sharing next week as they're doing their thing in Sheridan. All right. Well, this morning we're going to continue our journey through the book of Judges, and we're looking at Judges 13 through 15. I'm fudging a little bit going ahead since I won't be here to preach next week. Oh, if there are kids that want to go to children's church, then parents can take them back there. I just got the signal. All right. Judges, as we've said, is a very difficult book, and it's a difficult book in different ways than other difficult books. Joshua, that we finished before we came into Judges, is a difficult book because it's focused on conquest, and that is a hard thing for us to reconcile. Why would God say go in and crush somebody? That just doesn't line up for us. It was a hard book to wrestle with. But Judges is a difficult book in a different way because it's a book that's all about when people did what was right in their own eyes. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And the problem with that is everybody has different eyes. Everybody thinks differently about what is the right thing to do and what they want to do. And we tend to get very selfish when we're doing what's right in our eyes. And so they abandon God. And the results in what we read in the book of Judges are disturbing. And it's not just disturbing once, but it's continually getting worse. As this story unfolds, we see over and over again how the Israelites are engaging in more and more disturbing and just confusing behavior. So a part of the story of Judges is that deliverers rise up, that they have people that come up to deliver the Israelites. Sometimes these are chosen by God, and sometimes these are chosen by people, but God empowers them. We've read a lot of these stories. And there's also this destructive cycle that we see over and over in the book of Judges. And the cycle is that the Israelites choose to ignore God. They're conquered by an outside enemy. They cry out to God. God hears them and sends a deliverer. And then they again ignore God. It's just this cycle over and over. Well, this week we read two cycles that are slightly different. The first one, the one that we read earlier this week, and we talked about this one on Wednesday night, was a cycle where God didn't send a deliverer. They cried out to God in their despair, and God said, why don't you cry out to the gods that you've been worshiping? Why don't you give them a shot? Well, they're fake gods. They can't help them, and they know that. That's why they're crying out to the true God. So they go and they find a deliverer, and then that deliverer, God chooses to empower that deliverer, and he frees Israel from the Ammonites. But it's a destructive situation, as almost all of our deliverers are, because our deliverers are messed up people. And Jephthah was messed up and did a lot of messed up stuff. So this week, we read about Samson. And the cycle again is different. This time the Israelites are oppressed by the Philistines, and if you're familiar with the Old Testament story, this is the first time the Philistines really show up as the enemy. They've been there, but this is the first time that they really show up. Now, they're going to continue to be throughout the life of Samuel and Saul and into the life of David. They're the enemy. But this is the first time that we see them. Now, interestingly, this story that we're reading about Samson takes place at about the same time that Samuel is being raised up. So we may talk about that in a couple of months when we get to Kings or Samuel, but it's about the same time period. But this time, where the cycle is different, is that their hearts are so hard, they don't even know to cry out to God. So the last time they cried out to God, and God said, cry out to the gods that you've been worshiping. And this time their hearts are so hard, they're so used to doing their own thing, that they don't even get to that point of crying out to God for help. They just say, we deserve this, it's ours, oh well. And yet God still wants to help them. So God starts to intervene in this story, because even though the Israelites have frustrated him over and over and over again, he is not giving up on his people. As we talked at the beginning of Judges, failure is not the end of the story. Just because there's failure does not mean that God gives up. God is not giving up on his people, even though they have done horrific things. He's sending them a deliverer again. And this time, he approaches this story through a woman who can't have kids. We don't know her name. We know her husband's name, and we know the name of the son. The son that she will eventually have after the angel appears is someone by the name of Samson. We know that she's been unable to have kids. And this is a very difficult thing in that culture. Now, today, people choose not to have kids. Sometimes it's a biological thing. Sometimes it's just a preference thing. And nobody thinks any the worse for that, except the parents who want grandkids and Mike Badger. But for this culture, when Samson was born, to not be able to have kids was an indication that there was something really wrong with you. And that God was punishing you, or the gods were punishing you for whatever this sin is and keeping you from having kids. Now, we're going to read in a couple of months. We'll get to Samuel. Samuel's mother is dealing with the same thing. And Samuel's mother is unable to have kids, and she's crying out to God for kids, so much so that the priest in the temple thinks she's a drunk. And God says, okay, I'll give you a child. In this situation, we don't have any record that Samson's mother was crying out to God. Now, clearly, she was heartbroken over not being able to have kids. But there's no evidence in this story that anybody's crying out for help. It's just like they've accepted the misery and said, well, this is what it is. There's nothing better for me. But the angel appears to this woman and gives her some good news. He says, you're going to have a kid. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to raise that kid as a Nazirite. We'll talk in a minute about what that means. But you're going to raise this kid special. And this child is going to begin to deliver Israel. And he's going to be a Nazirite from birth. So what's a Nazirite? It's different from being a Nazarene. That's what this church is. It's a church of the Nazarene. Nazirites are different. Nazarene, we take our name from a village in Nazareth that Jesus grew up in. We take it to be, we're to be like him. But before Nazareth ever existed, God had set up this vow in the book of Numbers, this vow that people could take if they wanted to be closer to him. They could take the Nazirite vow. And it's a vow that could be taken for life. We see a couple of examples with Samson, and actually Samuel is going to be a Nazirite for life. But it's also a specific time period. So a Nazirite for a couple of months or for a year. This is outlined in the book of Numbers, and there are three big things that Nazirites are supposed to engage in. First of all, they're supposed to abstain from alcohol completely. Not even being around a vineyard, not even touching grapes. Completely staying away from alcohol. Second is no touching dead things. No touching carcasses, no touching human remains, nothing. And third, no haircuts. You can never cut your hair, or you can't cut your hair while you're under the Nazirite vow. And a part of this is, rather than choosing alcohol, you're supposed to be committing to God. You're supposed to be chasing after God. And there's this sense that the Nazirites are giving up on things that they normally would be engaged in and appearing to be different from everybody else by the no haircut thing, so that they can connect better with God. That's the point. Now, we see several Nazirites in Scripture. Samuel and Samson, these two are both Nazirites from birth. Neither one of them are supposed to get a haircut. Samuel doesn't, Samson does. And then in the New Testament, we also see the Apostle Paul appear to have taken the Nazirite vow. And there's a period where he has taken the vow and he's trying to get back to Jerusalem so that he can fulfill the vow. But there's also instances where Paul was told to pay the offering for others who have taken this Nazirite vow. So it's something that happens in the New Testament as well. So back to the story of Samson. Samson's mother goes and tells her husband, you're never going to believe what just happened. Somebody appeared to me, and this is the message that he gave. And Samson's dad responds with, I need to see it to believe it. You got to pray for this angel or this person to come back again, because we need to hear that. I need to hear this. And so the angel comes back. And it's interesting because Samson's father starts asking all of these questions, and the angel tells Samson's father the exact same thing that he had told Samson's mother. I already said this. This is what it's going to be. In other words, you can trust what she's saying. She's not lying, and I'm not going to give you any special message other than what I've already given her. And then there's this whole dramatic scene where he wants to give an offering, and that's not how God does things. God doesn't want us to just offer things. There's a specific, in the Old Testament, there's a very specific process for that. But he says, if you want to offer a goat as an offering to God, then you can put it here, and it's consumed with fire, and then this being disappears in the smoke. Everybody's excited. except for Samson's father, who's saying, we're going to die because we've seen God. No, you've seen an angel, and that's a very different thing. So, our hopes are high. When we read of a birth narrative like this, we get really excited. Because there's only one other birth narrative that we read about where before the child was born, an angel appears and good things are going to happen. That's Jesus. And then we read about this story, and our hopes are high. You're thinking, this Samson character, he must be an amazing, amazing person. If this is how his birth came about, God must be ready to do something pretty phenomenal here. And our hopes are high. God is intervening. Things are going to go well, or so we think. As we get into chapter 14, our hopes get dashed. Because Samson starts the story of his adult life by falling in love with the wrong woman. It's kind of the Romeo-Juliet kind of thing. He falls in love with a Philistine, a daughter of the enemy. And his parents are like, there's all of these Jewish girls. Can't you find one of those? Nope, this one looks right to me. I've got to have this one. And he demands to be married to her. We don't have necessarily a physical description of Samson, but we kind of think that he's a pretty big guy. Some of the physical feats that he pulls off, we know he's a pretty strong guy. And so if he's telling his father and mother, who are now up in years, you've got to get this woman for me, I'm guessing there's a part of this that he's kind of spoiled a little bit because mom waited so long for him. But part of it is he's probably pretty intimidating to dad. And so they say, okay, we'll go get this girl. On one of his courtship trips, he's going to see this young lady, and he encounters a lion in a vineyard. Now remember the Nazirite vow. He's not even supposed to be close to a vineyard. But he's in a vineyard, and he encounters this lion. And he kills the lion because he's a strong guy, and he tears it apart, is what the story tells us, which is kind of an intimidating thought. And then his next trip, he stops to see the carcass, once again in the vineyard where he's not supposed to be, and he stops to find honey in the carcass, which he wasn't supposed to touch. Okay, so no, and Samson does it anyway. Not only does he take some of the honey, he doesn't tell his parents where it comes from, but he just kind of comes out of the bush with honey on his hands and gives some honey to his parents. And his parents take the honey and eat it. Now, in Jewish law, there's a law that says you're not supposed to eat stuff that comes out of dead bodies. There's a reason for this law. I mean, it makes sense, right? We don't walk up on a dead animal and start eating something that's oozing from it. You get the image here. God has set some laws in place to protect his people, and so don't touch dead bodies. Don't eat stuff that comes from dead bodies. And so Samson knows that he can't tell his parents where this came from because he just technically made them unclean as he made himself unclean and as he broke his Nazirite vow again. But he comes out of this experience with a riddle. And I get the sense, and I could be completely wrong, but you kind of get a picture of Samson in this, that he's this big, kind of muscular, not so bright guy. Because he's excited he's got a riddle. And he uses his riddle. His father went to visit the young woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, as young men were accustomed to do. And when the Philistines saw him, they brought 30 men to accompany him. Understand that this means they saw him, they were afraid, and they hired guards. Okay? So these 30 men show up, and Samson says, let me tell you a riddle. If you could explain it to me during the 7 days of the feast, and just so you know, this word feast indicates heavy drinking, which again, Samson was not supposed to do. He says, if you figure this out during the 7 days of the feast, I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you can't explain it to me, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. Well, tell us your riddle, they replied. Let's hear it. So he said to them, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. So here's his riddle. He's excited. He's proud of himself. And after 3 days, they're unable to explain it. So on the fourth day, they go to Samson's fiancée, wife, whatever we call her at this point. Persuade your husband to explain the riddle to us, or we're going to burn you and your father's family to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? In other words, did you hire us as guards in order to make us lose money? So Samson's wife came to him weeping and said, you hate me and don't love me. You told my people the riddle, but you haven't explained it to me. Look, he said, I haven't even told my mom and dad about it. Why should I explain it to you? Well, he hasn't told his mom and dad because he's not supposed to eat stuff that comes out of dead things. What a story. Our hopes are dashed. We're getting a sense of who this guy is. He's not the deliverer that we've anticipated. He's not this one that brings about awesome things and delivers his people from their oppressors. Instead, he gets messed up with these guards. So Samson gives them a riddle they refuse to lose. And so they hound his wife, threaten her life, threaten her family's life. And so she gets the answer out of Samson. And Samson's response is to say, you know what? I'll give you your 30 changes of clothes. I'm going to go kill 30 of your friends to get it for you. And that's what he does. He goes and kills 30 Philistines, takes their clothes, and brings it back to these guys. What a mess. What a messy response to a riddle from somebody who thought he was so smart. I wish I could say that the story gets better from here, but it doesn't. It spirals. Later on, during the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat as a gift and visited his wife. Why she's not living with him, we don't know, but she's not. I want to go to my wife in her room, he said, but her father would not let him enter. I was sure that you hated her after killing 30 people to give 30 clothes to our guards. So I gave her to one of the men who accompanied you. Now in the Hebrew, that's actually the best man of the wedding. I gave her to the best man. Her younger sister is more beautiful than she is. Why not take her instead? And Samson said to them, this time I'll be blameless when I harm the Philistines. So he went out and caught 300 foxes. And it says foxes, but the word is probably more accurately translated jackals, based on where they're at and how plentiful foxes are versus how plentiful jackals are. Think jackals versus foxes here. We tend to think of the American fox, and we're thinking something very different. He took torches, turned the fox's tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. Then he ignited the torches and released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned the piles of grain and standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. Then the Philistines asked, who did this? They were told it was Samson, the Timonite's son-in-law, because he took Samson's wife and gave her to his companions. So the Philistines went to her and her father and burned them to death. Then Samson told them, because you did this, I swear that I won't rest until I have taken vengeance on you. So he tore them limb for limb and then went down and stayed in the cave at the rock of Edom. What a mess. Isn't this great news? A great love story from a great deliverer? What a mess. Samson goes home in a rage after he's killed these 30 people to take their clothes from them. He's mad about it. He goes home. Then he comes back later to see his wife, finds that his father-in-law has given her to another man because he assumed he hated her since he killed 30 people to give clothes to their guards. And so Samson gets mad and burns their harvest. Philistines are mad that their harvest is burned, and they learn that it happens because Samson's wife has been given to someone else. So they go and kill Samson's wife's family. They do what the guards originally had said that they were going to do. If you don't tell us this riddle, we're going to, well, that's what they end up doing. So Samson kills the ones who had killed his wife's family. You see this spiral? Kind of feels like we're watching the news, doesn't it? Wonderfully uplifting story. So the story continues. It doesn't end here. And I was trying to figure out how much of this story to read Originally, I was going to read all of 14 and all of 15, and then I realized I wouldn't have any time left to preach. So I said, okay, I'm just going to summarize here. The Philistines went to the other Jews. They demanded that Samson be handed over to them. The Jews come and get Samson. He makes them promise that they won't kill him, that they'll just tie him up. He'll go willingly if they just tie him up. So they do this, and so he goes to the enemy, breaks the ropes that he's tied up with, and kills another 1,000 Philistines. And then, of course, the story continues to be messy. But it all started because of a rotten riddle that Samson never should have told, because he wasn't supposed to touch the dead thing, and he wasn't supposed to be in the vineyard, and he wasn't supposed to eat honey from dead things. Samson's going to die after another failed love interest. Again, a Philistine. We believe it's a Philistine, Delilah. There's a couple others in between here and there. It's just a messy story. It's a continuing spiral of revenge. And that's ugly. So one of the questions that you have as you read this story is there's a verse at the very beginning of Samson falling in love with that first Philistine girl where it says his parents didn't understand this, but the Lord was causing this so that there would be a reason for offense. And scholars argue here a lot, and I didn't get a clear answer after reading a bunch of scholars who argued about this a lot, but I would think it's probably similar to our challenges. God never tells people to do what he's already told them not to do. So he's already told the Israelites that they're not to marry Philistines. He's already made that clear. So it's probably one of those things, kind of like in our situations, God doesn't cause the bad things to happen, but he can still try to work in the bad things that have happened as a result of our choices or the results of others' choices. Even though Samson has made this decision, he's breaking every rule that's ever been handed to him. God's saying, you know what, I can still use this. I can still do something good in this story. Now, there are a lot of lessons here, but not good lessons, not lessons from good examples. They're lessons from the wrong responses. There's some lessons about staying focused on what you're supposed to do. You remember at the very beginning of this story when the angel appeared to Samson's mother and he said, your son will begin to deliver Israel. You forget about that in all the drama that unfolds. What's Samson's purpose? It's not to just be a playboy who's bouncing back and forth between Philistine women. But that's the story we read. But that's not what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. And I think there's some pretty powerful lessons here about not taking revenge. This was one of the quotes that one of the scholars that I was reading in referring to the story of Samson. He said, revenge is an ugly word. In the mind of the offended, it is a matter of justice, the victim balancing the scales by getting even with the perpetrator. However, the scales are never evenly balanced. Because revenge calls for revenge, and too often in a seemingly never-ending and often escalating cycle. Samson sought revenge against the Philistines for the insult he had suffered. And in turn, the Philistines not only killed his wife and father-in-law, but also pursued Samson himself. What is the motivation for revenge? Is it a matter of justice, righting a wrong? Is it more a matter of dominance and control? What is to be gained by revenge? All that we do is confirm that the other person is an enemy. Ouch. Our world thrives on revenge or vengeance. Our world thrives on this. I mean, it's the plot in how many of our movies? It's all about getting revenge. It's all about getting vengeance. It's all about getting somebody back for what they've done to you. And it plays out in our lives too, in very devastating ways. Sometimes we even call it justice. And I think one of the most difficult things in the last couple of years is that we have mixed up the idea of God's justice with revenge. So much so that it's hard to tell the difference. We live to see those who hurt us or offend us suffer. We want to get them back for what they've done to us. That's the message that the world teaches. It's not a new message. Samson lived this message. But what does it mean to learn to rest in Jesus? What does Jesus say about this whole revenge thing? Jesus calls us to a very different approach because he knows that we will not experience peace if we live our lives seeking revenge. And what does revenge bring about? More revenge, which then more revenge, and then more revenge. And Jesus doesn't want us to live a life of seeking vengeance or seeking revenge. He wants us to live lives of peace. He knows that others won't see him in our lives if we're living our lives for revenge. In a very difficult sermon that Jesus preached, we call it the Sermon on the Mount, he said this. He said, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. For the one who wants to sue you and take away your shirt, give him your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to the one who asks you, and don't turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." Jesus is calling us to a very different approach to life than seeking vengeance. He calls us to live as his children. And we look to him for our salvation. We put our hope in him and not in our ability to make things right. Not in our ability to make someone else suffer because we've suffered. You see the conflicting messages here. The message of Jesus, which is the message of his Father, and then you see the message that Samson lived out. But this requires that we learn a very important lesson, and that is forgiveness. Forgiveness is the center of the gospel message. It's the center of a message that said, Jesus chooses to forgive us even though every one of us, has sinned. But he offers us forgiveness. And he doesn't sit there with his Excel spreadsheet and say, well, let's see here. You've done this, and this. I've got to have this, and this out of you. He says, I forgive you. That's given to us. And that's to be the message that we live, not the message of seeking revenge. Forgiveness is the antidote to revenge. Because if not treated, revenge destroys. Do you ever know of anybody who lived their entire life angry and bitter and trying to figure out ways to get even with people? That describes my family reunions. I get it. This is what I grew up in, and this is how I lived for a long time. I can look back on my childhood growing up, and I can gauge better by who my mother was angry with than I can based on the year of school I was in. Because my mom always had enemies that she hated, and she was always pouring out venom against these people. The last time that I saw my mom, and she's still alive, but the last time that I saw her, she was suffering from some kind of illness that the doctors could only explain as there's some kind of poison that your body is fighting against itself. and everything that she touched just caused her to recoil. Everything was painful. And the doctors just explained that her body was fighting against itself. And I would say I am not that kind of doctor. I would say that's a result of what's going on inside. I'm not that kind of doctor. I don't know. But it's messed up. And the sad thing is that I picked up living this way from my mother. And I had enemies. When I first went to college, I had a curb shot. I slid on the ice and ran my car into a curb and did some pretty significant damage to the front end. It was at that point that I realized I was 18 years old, maybe 19 at that point, living in Colorado Springs, which has some of the highest insurance rates in the country. A single 19-year-old man with 4 speeding tickets on my record in the first 6 months that I had moved to Colorado Springs. And my insurance rates, we'll just say that they were more than my rent at the time. I was being quoted property and liability, $600 a month. Insurance on an old beat-up pickup truck. Rent wasn't that high. And I took my car to get it fixed, and the company that worked on it, something happened and they busted my windshield out. And I don't know what happened. They were messing with something and they busted the windshield out. And for some reason, I got so furious. I was so filled with venom. This company advertised on Christian radio, and every time their ad came on, I would slam the dash, turn that radio off. I didn't want to hear their ad. And I made it all the way up to the top of the company, telling the owner how horrible his people were. It was a simple mistake, but I was so blinded by rage. And again, how did this happen? I slid on the ice and hit a curb. Whose fault is that? Well, I bought the tires from them and they were slick. It's their fault. No, it's my fault. I was going too fast on an icy road. This consumed me for probably a year and a half. And I had to drive by one of their locations every day, no matter which way I went, I had to drive by one of their locations. And I would just get filled with rage every time I drove by. And Janelle and I were newlyweds, and she had never dealt with this kind of rage before in her life. And she spent an awful lot of time trying to talk me down and say, why are you so angry about this? Because and it took me a couple of years to see how absolutely foolish I was in this. This is goofy. I mean, who cares? They fixed the windshield. The only thing I had to deal with was there was some glass left in a cup holder. That's what I got so angry about. It's like, who cares? Clean up the stupid glass and move on with life. And I don't know what it was that made me so mad in that. I still don't. But I know I got in this cycle of revenge where I was so committed to telling everybody that I knew how this company had wronged me. Debated taking out my own ads on Christian radio. Couldn't afford it because I was paying so much for insurance. But if not treated, revenge destroys us. I was listening to a podcast this week and heard this quote from Tim Keller, who's an amazing pastor who's dying right now of cancer. But he says this, he says, if you don't forgive, you won't really be seeking justice, you'll be seeking vengeance. And vengeance is a motivation that leads to excess and eats you alive while you're going after it. So you tell yourself you're going after justice, but actually you're probably going to want more than what is just fair. You're probably going to want the person to suffer and be angry and upset just like you are. You probably won't be very convincing because we obviously see that you're eaten up with a desire for payback. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the process. And here's the kick. He said, justice is something you do for others, other victims' sake, for God's sake, for the human community's sake, for justice' sake, even for the perpetrator's sake. But justice isn't about you. That's an interesting way of looking at this. Now, last week we talked about our purpose, about how Samson we talked about how in the story of Abimelech's brother Jotham called people to remember their purpose. And here we see a story that started with such hope. Hope for Israel to be delivered, and that never happens because Samson missed his purpose. Why did Samson miss his purpose other than because he was chasing the wrong women? Because he was consumed by revenge. He was supposed to liberate Israel. Instead, he makes things worse for them. Because he was chasing revenge, and it all started with a rotten riddle. We're called to live differently. And we talked last week about how God has given each one of us purpose. There are universal purposes to be in relationship with Him, to be human beings, to be in relationship with each other. And then there are individual purposes that are the passions that light each one of us, that excite each one of us. And yet we can lose these purposes if we're consumed with revenge. And I use the example of my mom, and I use the example of me in college because I know what it is to lose sight of purpose because you're so consumed with revenge. I've witnessed it in my life. I've watched as my mother has isolated her from every person in her family because she is so consumed with getting revenge. And at this point, we don't even know what she's mad about this time. And it's hard. We can lose our purpose. My mother's a very, very talented person, an amazing artist. She was a gifted speaker, very talented person. But she can't use any of that because she is so consumed with rage and revenge. Our call is to rest in Jesus. Can we trust ourselves into His capable hands? When we face the challenges that we face, can we trust that He is our salvation and hope, not our ability to get revenge? Can we surrender our need for revenge? Now, I have to be honest with you, this is a very tough message to preach because it's one that I have to kind of look back at myself with. It's hard because our world teaches us that this is the way that we do things. And yet Jesus calls us to something very different. We have the example of Samson, and as I prayed this week, it's like, Lord, what message do you want me to bring out of this? Because the more you read Samson's story, the harder it is to find anything good in it. Lord, what do you want me to see in this? And when I was studying the commentators and Branson made the comment that he made about revenge just necessitates more revenge. It's like, okay, Lord, we need to hear this. In 2023, we need to hear this. With what we see every time we turn on the news, we need to hear this. With what we see, with what I see in my own family, I need to hear this. And I need to make sure I don't pass on to my girls the same thing that was passed on to me. Heavenly Father, this is a tough message. It's tough because our natural tendencies is to get revenge. From a very early age, children learn revenge. If you hurt me, I'll hurt you. You pull my hair, I'll pull your hair. You bite me, I'll bite you. And it just gets worse from there. And God, we live in a world that makes movies about and rewards revenge. It rewards this perspective, and yet we watch as revenge destroys lives, destroys families. God, you have given us a different option. And I pray that you would help us to live into that option. Not that it's easy, but I pray that you would help us to chase after that. To, as Paul says, find strength in our weakness. God, I pray that you would help each one of us in the situations that we face, that we would be able to hear what you want us to hear and live what you want us to live, to fulfill the purposes that you have given us, the universal purposes, but also the individual purposes, and that we would not be sidetracked by a desire for revenge. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. And you are dismissed. God bless.